And hence, it's my super big pleasure to introduce you to a person that is relevant and that is very influential in the Fully Charged show, if you have seen that. And he will give us an outsider's perspective, not so much outsider anyways, because he's also an insider in heating, but you may have seen him more in terms of assessing electric cars. Recently, he has also moderated the Fully Charged show Home Edition. So let's welcome Dan Caesar. We will start with a small introduction video and then he will come live on stage for the keynote.
Into the car from your solar panels, from the grid, from wherever, charge the car. But it can also go the other way. It can come out of the car and into the house or into the grid. So you can run your house on your car and you can run your car from your house. It goes both ways. And you can run the grid from the car and you can run the car from the grid. It goes both ways.
Well, I think this was impressive. In the video, we saw Robert Llewellyn, the mastermind behind the Fully Charged show, and now I'm super happy to introduce again Dan Caesar. He's the joint CEO of Fully Charged and the main presenter of the Fully Charged Home Edition.
Good morning, Thomas. Morning. It's very good to see you. Thank you very much for inviting me along today. So today I am talking from near London, and I'm aware that an Englishman talking to people in Brussels. I am not an expert on the subject that you are so expert on. I am not a technocrat, nor am I an engineer, nor, most importantly, am I a politician. But I would consider myself an energy geek and a communicator, and I've been working on Fully Charged for 5 years now with Robert Llewellyn. And I believe we bring an interesting outside perspective on how to communicate with consumers in particular. So I do have a presentation to walk you through, if that's okay. So could I have the first slide up, please? Okay, so it's a real pleasure for us to be here today. I'm sorry I can't be with you in Brussels next year. I hope to be joining you in person. Next slide, please. For us, it's really about making sure heat pumps are at the heart of a green recovery. I have been working in the heating industry since 2003, and most of that time, since really 2005, I've been promoting sustainable technologies with heat pumps have been very, very close to my heart throughout that time. And from my perspective, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And for me, heat pumps is that great idea that we really need to deploy and at high speed over the next 10 years. Next slide, please. Before I do so, I just wanted to give you a quick introduction to the channel. Some of you may be aware of Fully Charged and some of you may not. So I think it's useful just to give you a very brief overview of what we do. We are the world's #1 channel of our type for electric vehicles and for clean energy. Next slide, please. The channel was launched 11 years ago by Robert Llewellyn, who used his TV celebrity. He used to be on something called Scrap Heap Challenge in the UK, and also used to be in a sci-fi sitcom called Red Dwarf. And he had the foresight, a bit like Reiner, to set something like this up many, many years ago. And we have managed to accrue almost 825,000 subscribers around the world. We get over 2 million views each and every month, and it's a genuinely global channel. We do have actually about a quarter of our audience on mainland Europe, as well as over a quarter in the UK as well. We would describe our audience as EV curious and energy savvy, huge interest in electric cars, but that doesn't mean that all our audience have one. They're actually looking, and it can take quite some time for people to pluck up the courage to actually finally go electric. But also, probably for me, where I'm super passionate is about home energy technology, and huge interest in that as well from our audience. So what we do is we provide educational, entertaining content. We are an independent voice, and our audience is on YouTube, at least largely male, although when we do live shows, it's much more of a family affair. Our audience is predominantly consumer, although 14% of our audience is from the energy and transport sectors, but particularly for people who are interested in technology, that's where our channel really comes into its own. So next slide, please. We have gone from 3 people when I joined to almost 30 people now, and what unites us is the mantra, stop burning stuff. We want to move past combustion technologies, whether it's engines in cars or boilers in houses, and we now have a team across the UK, but also we have lots of different presenters across the world as well. So there's some very interesting things going on in California and in China and in Korea and in Europe, and we can cover all those with our presenters around the world. We focus on all different types of things, but we're particularly interested in electric cars, electric vehicles of all shapes and sizes. That could be a cargo bike or it could be a cargo ship. We're not just about the electrification of transport as far as cars. We're interested in all vehicle types. Additionally, we're fascinated by making sure that we deploy clean energy. And from our perspective, you can find us on YouTube, but actually we have ambitions to go beyond YouTube and to be on mainstream streaming platforms in the very near future. Next slide, please. So you may be familiar with us from our car output. It's actually been pretty easy to film cars during the pandemic because actually we just get them delivered and we can get in them and we can review them. It's been much harder to go into homes and factories and buildings. But this is a recent episode we put together, but you can find pretty much information about every electric car on our YouTube channel. Next slide, please. But in addition to that, we cover some, what I find actually more interesting, ironically, other types of topics. So maybe commercial vehicles, places around the world where they're deploying electric technologies at a high rate. Things like batteries, can they be recycled? Yes, of course they can. And bikes too. Next slide, please. But we have always been fascinated by home technology, and we have always wanted to cover it in more detail. So we have covered it periodically on the channel, but we took a conscious decision in the last year that actually we would do much more home technology. We felt there was a very, very strong desire from our audience to find out what they needed to do within their homes. The complication with homes, of course, is they're also different. Housing stock is it varies so much that actually it's quite a complicated story. So we began with our home energy series in the summer, 6-part series, and now we're going to be producing regular home technology content on our Fully Charged Plus channel on an ongoing basis, with an episode today about electric wallpaper and digital bricks, if that's your sort of thing. Next slide, please. But what we wanted to do today really was that's the introduction, of course, in terms of our kind of our background, our kind of understanding of the market, is talk about what we've learned as we've worked over a decade to communicate directly to consumers. I have been to many, many, many events like the EHPA Forum, and they serve an incredibly important value. But certainly 5 or 6 years ago, before I joined Fully Charged, I was mindful of the fact that quite often it was industry talking to industry, and we needed to get out there and talk directly. What I found when I found and met Robert Llewellyn and saw his channel, I thought he has created the perfect vehicle with which to actually attract consumers towards the different types of technologies that we should be deploying. And at the heart of that is the electric car. And what's interesting for us now is this is no longer a niche pursuit. You can see from Norway, from the Netherlands, from Germany, from the UK and other countries besides, the uptake of electric cars now is surging. And we believe that actually the tipping point's happened, and that this is an inevitability now. It's just how quickly we get to a preponderance of electric cars all across the Northern Hemisphere. From our perspective, though, what's interesting about the electric car, though, is it is a very, it's a product that people desire, it's people to aspire to, people are inspired by, rightly or wrongly. It is one that fires up people's imagination. And having spent my life in the heating industry and being quite familiar with the humble boiler, it doesn't quite get people excited in the same way that electric cars do. So from our perspective, this has given us some interesting opportunities, not least because the typical journey we find when people get an electric car is as soon as they do that, they become much more engaged with the energy they use. So obviously, one of the first things they might have to do is install an electric charger at home, then look at the energy supplier and look at everything else. And they can actually see energy in a much more visible way than they can by pumping liquid fuel into a car. So our proposal really is that electric cars are something that are creating a slipstream within which we can put the other technologies, because once people are aware and interested in electric cars, typically they find the adjacent technologies more interesting. And I propose that we put heat pumps firmly in that category, firmly in that slipstream. And I'd say one thing, if you're looking to sell heat pumps, if you can identify who's bought electric cars, actually they will be amongst the most open-minded and most interested. Next slide, please. There are a number of heroes of the energy transition, as we see it, a number of technologies, and there are also a lot of red herrings. And we hear about 20 different technologies mooted as the future on a regular basis by politicians. But there's some that we simply do not believe are ready for mainstream and possibly will not be ready for mainstream. So we prefer to concentrate on the ones which we think are the heroes. And of course, we count electric cars in that. Smaller electric vehicles, things like electric bikes, for example, larger electric vehicles. We're even starting to focus on electric aviation and electric marine technologies now as well. And clearly, wind, solar, and batteries are a big part of this story. They have absolutely transformed the way we think about and use energy already, and there's much more to come from them. We are very focused on energy efficiency and reducing energy consumption, but I'm sure you'll be heartened to see that the big one we see on there with huge opportunity as a hero of the energy transition is heat pumps. Next slide, please. So what we've observed very much is some people just aren't ready and are not easily persuaded to move on the journey towards any types of new technologies. So in the time we've been promoting electric cars, what we found is there are some pioneers out there. From our perspective, Robert Llewellyn, our founder, actually got his first electric car over a decade ago, so he would fall into that camp. I got my first electric car 6 years ago, so I'd probably fall into the early adopters camp. And now what we're seeing is early mainstream adopting these technologies. And then after that, we will reach the late mainstream and laggards as well. And the parallels are interesting between this and between heat pumps, really, because I think electric car market is that bit more advanced. And one of the things we've found with electric cars, if you push too hard to try and get a laggard or someone from the late mainstream into an electric car, you're going to use and expend a lot of energy trying to convince someone. And A, you might not succeed, but B, if they do get in that vehicle and they don't like it, they will be the first one to complain and rubbish the technology. So from our perspective, it really is about working out who the pioneers are, who the early adopters are, and who the early mainstream is, and targeting all our energies there. We do not need to convert everyone at once, but clearly we want to convert as many people as we possibly can, as quickly as we can. So next slide, please. What we also have to deal with a great deal is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the myths that are kind of concocted and pumped out, and you'll see regularly in the media, especially in Britain. And again, I think there are parallels to be drawn between what you're seeing in the electric car market and the heat pump market as well. There are lots of different myths that are out there. These are just a handful of them. These are some of the stickiest, the most difficult to resolve. But from our perspective, range anxiety has always been something that people have brought up, although I can say I've never suffered from that. I appreciate when you first get an electric car, the first week or so, you're just getting your bearings and your surroundings. But now most electric cars, of course, have 200, 250 or 300 mile range. Even for a high mileage user like me, I do 35,000 miles a year on average. An electric car is very doable. The charging infrastructure is often mooted not be good enough, and actually I think it is pretty good. I've had very, very few issues over the years, and actually it's being built out at a very, very, very high speed, and probably in terms of deployment, actually it's being used less. So it's matching demand at the moment and will continue to grow. Grid capacity, this is something that is familiar, of course, to heat pump proponents. If we have electric cars and heat pumps, will the grid go down? And we basically refer to National Grid on the UK on a regular basis to say, no, that's not the case. Battery degradation. Back in the years of Top Gear, when they used to talk about electric cars, the idea was that a battery in a car was akin to one in a mobile phone, and therefore it would degrade quickly, and you'd be replacing it every 2 years. Well, that's not the case, and not only is that not the case, actually electric cars go much longer on a battery than they would do on an engine. And there is actually a Tesla out there with over 900,000 miles on the clock, and there are plenty with over 500,000 miles on the clock. So actually, it is quite conceivable that an electric car purchase could actually replace 2 combustion engine vehicle purchases. And then overall cost of the initial price of an electric car, yes, that is more expensive typically, but the overall cost when you factor in servicing and maintenance actually is very comparable and sometimes cheaper than a combustion engine car. And actually running costs for electric cars are incredibly low. And then environmental impacts. How do we get the materials and what do we do with them afterwards? And obviously, if you are going to be making millions of cars, there is going to be an environmental impact to getting some of those materials out the ground. There's no way around that. Actually, as a channel, we believe in fewer cars. Smaller cars, lighter cars, more shared cars. But if you must have a car, we recommend it's pure electric. But there is an impact to that. But the great thing about electric cars is that batteries can be almost entirely recycled, which for many years we haven't really questioned burning petrol to the air and the problems it causes. Next slide. So another thing we love to do is to shortcut to real world examples. Norway is a fascinating market to watch, and if you can see the graph there, you can see the black line and the red line represent diesel and petrol car sales over the last 10 years in Norway, and they have absolutely plummeted. And the green line represents pure electric vehicles. And showing people what's going on in Norway is a great shorthand to say, actually, not only can it be done, it is being done. And we would go further and say, actually, plot where your country is on this graph. We think the UK is about 3 to 4 years behind Norway, for example. We think the US is another 3 years back. And then you can roughly work out how long before you convert to an all-electric car park in your country. We actually think in the UK, it could all be done as soon as 2027 or 2028, which would make the ICE combustion vehicle ban in the UK for 2030 actually moot. We also point regularly to what's going on in China. I receive a lot of press releases from councils in the UK saying, we've got 3 electric buses, isn't that fantastic? And I tend to send them back our video of Shenzhen in China that has 16,000 electric buses and 22,000 electric taxis. Much of the trialing is going on elsewhere in the world, and actually we would be well advised to look at leading countries and leading markets and adopting their practices. There's some fantastic things going on with renewable energy in Costa Rica. I was in Amsterdam last week, and there are some really interesting things going on in the Netherlands, and also the UK as a whole has transformed its power system away from coal power towards wind, and in large part that is down to Scotland. So next slide, please. And from my point of view, Thomas said something really interesting at the beginning, which is the iPhoneization of heat pumps. I'm sorry to say to any, boiler fanatics out there, they are relatively uninteresting as a technology. I think heat pumps are much cooler, but I think we have to go further, and the language we use really needs to cut through. And I do still see things on heat pumps that are relatively dry, and I think we should be bolder with our choices of words, because at the end of the day, this is the future-proof technology. Rainer made a fantastic point about, if you're a gas installer now, maybe you should be thinking ahead, because that's where the jobs lie. But also from a consumer, it is a future-proof technology. It is pretty much the most sustainable option available, and we talk about COP as an acronym on a regular basis. And I really think we should be talking about hyper efficiency of our technologies. Heating and cooling was another point that was already raised. That really is a fantastic potential example of why heat pumps are the thing, the hero potentially of where we're going. Heat as a service is something we are keeping a close eye on. And what we would like to do really is pitch, our advice would be to pitch the heat pump as the heart of the smart energy system, or the killer app for home energy. Next slide, please. And also we find, I've worked very well with many engineers over the years, but it's quite easy to lose yourself in how much we love the technology and all the deep dive into all the details. And sometimes when you're dealing with consumers, you just need to cut through and be really direct. And I think the reality is that, unfortunately, there are some consumers out there, people who watch Fully Charged, who really care passionately about these technologies, really get it, will spend the time doing the research. But for every one of them, there are a large amount of people who just don't care as much. And so for that purpose, we recommend being very simple in our language, extremely direct. Obviously, there is an urgency to everything we do, and we need to persuade people with the kind of bolder language I've put forward earlier. But above all, it's about reinforcement. And boringly, when you're a communications person, the boring hard work bit is about repetition, keeping it interesting, but repeating the message. That is the way we win and get this into the mainstream. Next slide, please. We're getting close to the end of the presentation, but just a couple more thoughts really before we conclude. There may be trouble ahead, not for heat pumps. I think that is going to be an incredibly exciting decade, 2 decades for heat pump deployment around the world. But seriously, what we're seeing in terms of climate-related events, it was a hugely sobering moment for me when I saw what happened in Germany earlier in the summer. We could well reach unexpected tipping points. And so the movements that are rising up around the world, whether it's School Strike for Climate, Extinction Rebellion, or others, they are only going to intensify, in my opinion. The cacophony of noise that comes from those groups is going to get louder and louder and louder. Where it seems to be an issue at the moment is we do have some intransigence amongst governments who are talking about a range of different technologies. Perhaps it's hydrogen boilers, perhaps it's carbon capture and storage. But some of these technologies are red herrings. For us, we need to firmly ensure that heat pumps is absolutely central to policy going forward. And then I would say a word about tight supply chains. I think the world has woken up to what a supply chain means over the last 18, 20 months or so. And actually, I don't know enough about the materials that go into a heat pump. Many of you will know much more than me on that subject. But what I would say about electric cars is the demand is there. The cars are now there. What is interesting is, can we get enough lithium, for example, into the supply chain fast enough to supply the surging demand? There's plenty of lithium in the world. There's some nice ways of extracting it that are not too environmentally unfriendly, but can we actually get it into the supply chain quickly enough? And then to Rainer's point, we absolutely see installers as a big issue. I can speak to my experience in the UK, having worked consulted for the Department of Energy and Climate Change when they launched the renewable heat incentive back in the UK a few years ago. I can confirm that the UK installer is fatigued. They have had lots of incentives and subsidies thrown their way, often very confusing, very hard to apply for incentives, and then often they have been pulled away. So the UK installer network, while there are some great ones out there who are super committed to heat pump technology. There are others who are very fatigued and very scared of doing a lot of training again for it all to be pulled away from them. So I think that's a key factor. And then also I would say there will be some more disruption ahead. There will be a disruptive influences that make a real difference. Now, in America and with electric cars, obviously that was Tesla. And now that is rippling across the world, and it's not clear what will happen from a heat pump perspective, but we shouldn't rule out the fact that there will be a big disruptor. And so I'd just like to leave you with one thought, if I can. If I go on to the next slide. In the UK, you may be well aware of them. There's a company called Octopus Energy. They were founded in 2015, so only 6 years ago. They now have over 3 million customers in the UK. Their business is actually founded on an AI and machine learning software platform called Kraken, and they offer that under license to other energy companies. So actually have 17 million customers globally on that Kraken platform, and they're aiming for 100 million by 2027. They have a footprint in the US, Europe, Japan, and Australasia. And you may have seen it in the news in the last 48 hours. They've just taken on $600 million worth of investment from Generation Investment Management. If you're not familiar with that, that's the Vice President Al Gore's investment vehicle. And they are going to be investing very heavily in heat pump cost reduction. In the UK, heat pumps are pretty expensive because we don't have any scale yet and a variety of other reasons. So they have vowed to get heat pump installation costs in total down to £4,000 to £5,000 in the next 18 months or so. And as part of that, they recognize the installer shortage that I alluded to on the previous slide, and they're actually going to invest in training 1,000 installers per year to take matters into their own hands as well. So from my perspective, that's one to watch, and it just shows that there is more disruption possible. Next slide, please. So we will be coming to the Netherlands, to the RAI Exhibition Centre with our live show in the spring next year. Why do I mention that? Well, we're actually after people to volunteer to provide content. So if you go on to the next slide quickly. We want to convince thousands of people, if we can, in one space about electric cars, but also about heat pumps as well. And our recent event in Farnborough, we hosted 40 different live sessions across 3 days. I did a home energy session on each of the days. This was one image from a session we did called Beyond the Boiler, which featured heat pumps extensively. And I'm proud to say that despite this is a channel all about electric cars and electric vehicles, this was the busiest session we hosted across the entire weekend. It wasn't my charisma, it was definitely the fact we were talking about heating, and we had well over 1,000 people, consumers in the room listening to that. So we're going to bring the same format to Europe in March. We are after speakers. We're also after experts to work with us, because I think we'll set up a home energy advice team as well, so people can actually bring their plans of their houses and actually get some advice on what to do there and then. We're looking for European stories to tell, and we're looking for European contributors as well. So if anyone is interested in participating, my email is dan@fullycharged.show. And if we move on to the next slide. And that is all from me today, except to say I believe heat pump can absolutely be the hero of the energy transition, but it really will be up to the heroes in your room with you today, Thomas, to make that happen. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Dan Caesar. I think you have planted quite a few ideas in the brains of the people here. For sure, I liked it. I also liked our preparatory discussion, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing you in Glasgow and hopefully in March at the RAI in Amsterdam. Allow me one question, because time is progressing. Do you think that if installers would all drive electric cars, they would become heating installers more than staying in the gas business?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer to that is yes. I mean, I was presenting to an agency for Volkswagen about 18 months ago, an agency in London, I won't name them, and I was presenting to about 50 different people, and they were responsible for all the marketing for the new VW ID3. And I said to them, how many of you drive electric? And no hands went up. And this is obviously a problem, until you've experienced these things, how can you know for sure? So yeah, maybe we should if we can't afford to give away electric cars to a few installers, maybe we should give them a few heat pumps to get them going. I mean, there's some great installers out there, but I think in the UK in particular, there are a few that have been badly burnt by previous experiences. But as soon as you try this new technology, you realise, it may be better for the climate, it may be better from an air pollution perspective, but it sure is better as a technology, and that's the thing that will come with time, and I think will come quite quickly now.
Thank you. The energy transition is a truly fascinating subject. Thank you, Dan Caesar, and talk to you soon again. We will have a small seed for all the speakers planted, not in their brains, but in real. We will give every speaker a planted tree to decarbonize the world a little bit further. We will send that to you, Dan, and it should arrive, but the tree is planted, so you don't need to do anything for this benefit. Thank you very much again.